two men on a plane, not snakes on a plane like the movie, two men on a plane.
Gorgeous, baby. You're gorgeous.
This is the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. The show that everybody's talking about. The show that will become a necessary part of your weekly mental diet. The show that picks up where JoshRolfe.com leaves off. The show title that uses the word podcast 4 times. Introducing your host, Josh Rolfe.
The entire reason for this podcast, the reason it exists. Have you thought about that lately? You thought about why, or you might be new here. The reason the podcast exists, for those new and those returning, is this simple idea that I had several years ago of recording an audio version of my blog post that no one could understand at the time in written form. So I thought by recording it, everyone would understand. Because it's my voice, my inflection, you'd sort of get what I meant. Because I will admit, I am not a great writer. I'm not a perfect writer. I'm trying to be better, trying to be good. I like it. I like the craft. So I thought I'd do audio, created the podcast, which is the medium for recording audio and easily and freely dispersing it to the public. And when I did that, I had to create artwork. I had to create a name. And why I chose the most ridiculously long name that makes no sense whatsoever. What's an anti-podcast? What does that mean? I'm asking you. It's the name of my show, and I don't know what it means. I know what I meant it to mean. It's a show unlike any other podcast because I talk about everything. It's not a podcast about investing. It's not a podcast where I only interview fascists. It's not a podcast where I only talk about ballet or basket weaving. It's a podcast about everything, which is why I chose the subtitle, The Anti-Podcast on God and Man. By saying God and man, I'm basically saying it's about everything. Now, I wonder if people have been turned away because of the man part. They might think I'm only talking about men's issues. And there goes the women. There goes my lesbian and transgender listeners. If you happen to be listening for the first time and think by the man in the title that I'm addressing prostate issues or how much I can bench press, you're wrong. I do talk about everything, but I don't talk about my tricep exercises at all. Never. Except for right now. Should I talk about tricep exercises today? What I do like to talk about is the things that are funny to me. That's probably 90% of all the episodes. I'll talk about an issue that's funny. That's the man part. It's the part about the world we live in. It's more man in quotes, as in the old usage of man, what we now call humankind, to include everyone. Man, saying man used to mean men and women. Well, at one time, it just meant men. I will say that, historically speaking. But now, when I say it, I use it in the traditional term, but to mean humankind. So in about 10% of the episodes, I'll bring in the more heavy topics. The last episode, for example, was a slightly heavier topic. Not necessarily heavy. I mean, there was nothing funny about it. It was a short love story. And whenever you talk about love, that is a little more heavy. It was a true story about how I began to become enchanted with America, or how I fell in love with my country. It's just about a cross-country drive at the age of 7, and that was it. After I recorded it, I thought, this is the worst episode I've ever done. I'm getting off track here, as I sometimes do. So I'm talking about the heavier stuff, which is the God stuff. I didn't talk about God, but it's the stuff that is not of this world. It's about falling in love with your country, which is a transcendent experience, one above the human plane. It's a human experience, but one that is transcendent. It's probably the best way of saying it. So I thought, this is the worst episode. I was thinking that because I thought the quality could have improved by a lot. It was a boring episode to me. But all that changes today because we're back to the roots of this show, which is to produce an audio version of my blog. I guess last week's I was doing that too. But today's episode, I'm thinking this is, well, the difference is this is a new blog post. The one, I Love America, was written 2.5 years ago. So this is fresh. Today, this episode is fresh. It's new material. A couple weeks ago, it was the last day of the month. I stayed up really super late to publish a blog post that I call Two Men on a Plane. And I think that the quality of this blog post could still improve by a lot. I was working on it very late that night. I'm not going to try to improve it tonight when I record it here in a moment. But I want to stay very true to the spirit of the show, which is to have an audio version of the blog post. That's it. That's what I'm doing. To get blog posts, you can subscribe at joshblogblog.com. That's joshblog, the word blog twice, B-L-O-G, joshblogblog.com. When you get there, just scroll to the bottom. A pop-up appears. You enter your email. Simple as that. The benefit of the email is that you will see my blog post the last day of every month. That means coming up later this year on New Year's Eve, you will get an email from your faithful podcasting friend. I'm determined to do this. And last month, I proved it because at about 7 p.m., I was ready for bed. But I stayed up until super, super late. I was on a work trip. I think I got to my hotel room. It wasn't at 7. I got to my hotel room at like 10 or 10:30 or so. But I persevered and I published Two Men on a Plane. Now, since it was published, a few people have commented that they weren't sure of the two male characters on the plane. Which one is me? Which one is Josh Rolfe? The answer is they are two very fictional characters. I'm sure there's a little of me in both, and it was inspired by true events, but it is not true. So as the story goes, there are two men here in this piece who go nameless. The first is man 1. The second is man 2. They are the characters of this blog post. And again, just because the podcast is on God and man, and my two characters are man 1 and man 2, it doesn't mean I talk about body surfing and billiards And by those activities, I'm not saying those are only for men. They're not. I'm open. I'm politically correct. I love and embrace everyone. So here it is. I wanted to get two different men to record this, but you'll have to listen to me instead. Oh, and rate and review the podcast on iTunes. I'm sitting on 26 rankings, and I want to hit 30 before the year 2030. And now the post. 2 men on a plane. Man 1. We boarded the plane. I was the very last to board, as usual, because I really don't like standing in line. I really, really don't like standing in line. Why is that? Because I don't like to stand. I like to sit. Being the first to board a plane means more time standing in line, waiting for the gate to open. And that's why I like to be the last to board a plane, because I don't have to do that. To get here, in my seat on the plane, I had walked the entire length of the airport with no problems en route. Walking is fine with me. Moving at a 60-foot-per-hour pace is not. Think about it. Boarding first is great, but you stood in line for 30 minutes at the gate. 30 minutes is a lot of standing for someone like me who likes to sit. I've always been this way. When I worked retail, my first job in the 9th grade, the first hour of standing was a shock to my entire system. In my entire life, I had never stood for so long. Never in my whole entire life. I had walked, ran, played, but never had I stood stationary like that first day on the job, miserably standing stationarily at a cash register. Until 45 minutes into that job, I thought, this isn't right. About 30 seconds later, I found my boss and gave my 2-second notice. I quit, vowing I would never again in my life stand still for so long. First trip to Europe. I noticed at the grocery checkout that they sat. But no, we Americans, we have to stand. We have to stand all day long, whether it's that blue-collar job, standing in line at Disneyland, or watching the parade pass you by among the crowd on the city sidewalk. It's stand, stand, stand. No other country does this to its citizens. Not one. I've checked into it. I know they say sitting is bad for your health. They also say a lot of things are bad for your health. At least they believe those things. And who they are is whomever the mainstream contemporary science sages anoint as the seers of all human wisdom. Don't misunderstand. I have a reasonable amount of confidence in modern science, except for that time when my doctor gave me advice to have surgery, after which I got a second opinion from another doctor who, just like the first, graduated from an accredited medical school and, like the other, practices as a specialist in exactly the same field, yet who somehow proposed the complete opposite approach to solve my health issue. One chooses surgery, the other does not. One suggests heavy-duty medicine, the other herbs. One a cast, the other amputation. One proposes nothing, the other euthanasia. I have a genuine interest and trust in the human pursuit for good science, but I also carry a healthy amount of skepticism. So I've read the articles. Sitting isn't at all good for humans. It takes years off your life, they say. It's much better to stand for your physical health and well-being, they say. But I don't always do what is best for my health, I say. I do what is best for my mind. You see, the body scientists don't always factor in the best practices developed by the mind scientists. For me, the health benefits right there on my decision where I opt for good mind science over good body science is, for me, the better choice. And while this is by no means scientific, the skeptical part of me is reminded of the fact that my rear end is the fattest part of my otherwise lean body. So I'm inclined to think that the purpose of that fatty area is not to help support the human body in a standing position. It's for sitting, which is why I am last to board a plane. I do it to reduce the time standing. My seat was the never coveted middle seat, way back on aisle 12. I sat comfortably. It was wonderful sitting there, staring at the backs of 100 heads. For about 30 minutes, all was fine, all was normal. Then, all of a sudden, something happened in the row behind me. It happened directly behind me. It happened in the seat in the row directly behind me. He began to snore. It was a hearty, solid snore. It was as if he were awake, it was as if he was intentionally making pig snorting sounds. It was as if he were awake, his vocal cords were capable of producing an incredibly loud speaking voice. A voice so loud, very loud, or much louder than me. It was a manly snore, a confident snore, the kind one might engage in a more private setting, such as one's bed. The woman in the aisle seat to my right turned around once, then twice, wondering who it was who could be making such a noise. The man in the window seat to my left also turned around. Both seemed so bothered by it that I wondered if either would get up to forcefully nudge the snorer awake. Neither did. I've heard snoring on planes before. I've never heard snoring like this. The snoring continued. It would regress to a heavy inhale, exhale, then an aggressive, violently loud, full-fledged snore. The kind of snore that damages throats, that causes the non-viral kind of sore throat, the kind that causes throat cancer. After a few minutes, sitting in sitting bliss, I would forget all about the snore because he'd stop. He awakened for all I knew, until I again would be distracted by the noisy neighbor seated directly, as the crow flies, behind me. The one in row 25, and I was row 24. The one I assumed was a man because of the snorer's subwoofer-like, subterranean, tectonic plate-moving quality snore. The one who is tearing apart his throat and the ozone simultaneously, shredding both to pieces with each passing CO2-emitting snore. Would he ever communicate verbally again? The one whose snores were louder than any I'd ever heard on any plane in my lifetime. The snoring continued off and on for hours and hours. The man could snore and, quite remarkably, sleep through it all. The rumbling, steady roar of the plane engine would be silenced by another snore, a snore with a capital S. This kind deserved to become a pronoun. It was alive. The snore became white noise for the plane engine. In the battle of noise, the snore clearly won. We forgot we were flying on a plane. We were now flying on a snore. Again and again this continued, and again and again and again. It would not stop. Passengers became irritated. The irritated became anxious. The anxious became furious, and the furious went mad. Flight attendants began throwing pretzels around the plane. Movie watchers could hardly concentrate on their movie. Pilots rocked the plane to and fro in hopes that the passenger would finally wake up. Throughout this peculiar scene, sometimes I'd laugh. Sometimes I would get angry. But for the most part, I sat patiently, staring ahead, watching American Sniper through the 2-inch seat crack on the iPhone of the person in the row in front of me. The snore made me consider myself. I've been told on many occasions throughout my life that I, too, am a snorer. Apparently, I snore. And when I snore, I do so loudly. I do the kind of loud that vibrates the mattress, floor, and walls. The kind that can be heard in other rooms. Not only that, but I've even slept on plane rides. Which means I could have snored loudly at least once on a plane, possibly even twice. Who knows? I could snore every time I sleep on a plane. I've never been told by anyone after I awaken that I've been snoring. I don't think I've ever even been nudged. Fellow passengers may have just let me snore away until I awakened, as we were doing now for this man. Which is why I lacked the moral authority to do anything about the snoring man directly in the seat behind me, because this snorer could have been me. Maybe this man, I thought, like me, also likes to sit. This is a good coughing break point. Man 2. I never know what to do because I care too much what other people think. It's time to end it. It's time to not care what others think about me. I just buckled my seatbelt on a plane, and right this very moment, I'm thinking of what to do next. Suddenly, it hits me. I could fake sleep. I've never done that before. I could fake sleep. Why would I do that? What would that accomplish? Here's what it would accomplish. I would see if I could fake sleep in the most annoying manner possible and not stop based on the desires of the upset people around me. In case anyone was looking at me, I thought it would be a good idea to make it look as believable as possible. So as the plane lifted off, I pretended to fall asleep because that's usually when I fall asleep for real. I closed my eyes and then began to jerk my head from side to side in an effort to effectively and artfully get the right sleep look. By jerking my head from side to side, I wanted to show I was an energetic fake sleeper. As soon as I was fake asleep for about 2.5 minutes, I decided that fake sleeping wasn't going to be a problem. I would have to make some noise. So I began to fake snore. At first, no one seemed to notice, so I thought I'd make more dramatic snoring sounds. I can be a loud person when I speak, and so I tried to snore as loudly as I possibly could, and still nothing. I sensed no reaction whatsoever. I thought I'd try making a pig sound. I would make my snores more dramatic. I would saw logs. I literally made a sound of sawing a log. I began to hear people whispering. I was getting their attention. The whispers turned to concerned voices. Concerned voices turned to yells. I was finally beginning to make a scene. They wanted me to stop. And I'll tell you this, it was tormenting to not comply with their wishes. I wanted to stop so badly. I wanted everyone to be happy. I wanted everyone to be spared the pain of listening to my every snore. I kept snoring. The flight attendants were summoned. I kept snoring. The flight attendants said, I could overhear this, they would wake me up. But they couldn't touch me to awaken me. They couldn't give me a nudge. Even if they did, I became more and more calloused to their wants, needs, and desires. I kept snoring. The plane began to rock back and forth, side to side. My snore must be penetrating the steel door separating me from the pilots, I thought. My snore could be interfering with the communications of the plane. I was becoming more determined not to be switched off to airplane mode. I kept snoring. My snoring became snoring opera. I was performing a show of snores. I could feel the thick emotional reaction from the crowd. They were all ears. I was all theirs. "Sir! Sir!" the flight attendants beckoned. I kept snoring. "Wake up!" a toddler yelled from the back of the plane. Everyone laughed. Others throughout the plane began to yell, "Wake up!" After a few seconds, every passenger, in unison, began to chant, "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" This went on for several minutes. It was remarkable, and they sounded great. But I ensured that my snore would carry above their chants. My snore dominated. It was the snore to rule them all. I snored on for hours. It was the last time I didn't care what other people think.
Thank you for listening to the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. For more information, visit joshpodcast.com. Follow Josh on Twitter at Josh Rolfe. That's Rolfe, R-O-L-P as in podcast, H. Now go and have the best day and night ever. And have fun.